In 2014, something really big shifted for me. I was really sick and just not feeling well and feeling very out of balance in my body and my mind. Well, I started to practice yoga. I turned to spirituality as not as a hobby, but as something that I intuited could really help me to heal the things that I was suffering from. And here we are 11 years later. I've practiced yoga every day since I started, so that's over 4,000 days of practice. And I wanted to share today a little bit about that journey with you, with the hope that maybe some of these experiences and the insights and the revelations that I've had can support and help you in your journey. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who are coming to yoga, coming to breath work with this intention to heal, to transform, to grow. And I think that a lot of times, at least for me in my case, I was missing some of the deeper aspects of this path. And thankfully, I was able to encounter some very great teachers, to receive some teachings and techniques that really helped me to transform my life. So that's what I want to share with you today. These are some stories of a yogi. I used to be a big weightlifter. I started to train with weights when I was about 17 years old. And for 8 years of my life, or a little bit less than 8 years of my life, I was really devoted to the aspect of physical fitness through weight training. I was training to be an Olympic weightlifter. I was training a little bit in CrossFit. But all of those exercise regimens that I was really devoted to left me feeling more imbalanced and actually less healthy than I felt was natural. I experimented with many different diets, supplement protocols, all of the different aspects of, I guess you could call it physical fitness. I was really exploring that, and particularly performance. Well, that pursuit of performance really destroyed my body. It created a lot of imbalance and sickness, and that was like the turning point for me, was realizing that, wow, I'm training to perform, but I'm not actually really healthy. You know what I mean? And that didn't feel good. I was working a job I didn't like. I was relatively aimless. I was a very ambitious young man, but that motivation and that ambition and that drive left me feeling weak, confused, sad, a little depressed, anxious. It wasn't until the path of yoga presented itself to me and I started to practice yoga, that I saw that there was something in that path, in this path of working with the body, working with the breath, working with the mind, working with the spirit, that there was a missing ingredient for me in my fitness regimen, you could say, or my health routine. Slowly, I started to get better. I think a lot of people come to yoga because there's an idea that yoga can help us heal from different ailments that we have. And there's a mounting amount of research and science today that suggests that indeed yoga can bring many, many benefits to us. I mean, I can go down the list of lowering blood pressure, reducing anxiety, helping us manage depression, increasing the secretion of the feel-good hormones in our body, reducing body fat, reducing stress. All of these benefits that yoga practice does provide are like the sideshow. You know what I mean? They're side effects of the path. And people who are like myself, who were burnt out from the Western approach, turn to yoga as an alternative method because it promises that healing. The thing that I experienced was that I carried a lot of those conditions from my past into my practice with yoga. So I want to share like some of the changes and the transformations that I went through, and sort of the layers and the steps of my own journey, because I think that maybe hearing that might be helpful, especially if someone is maybe practicing yoga for some time, and realizing that, oh, there's actually something deeper to this path, or maybe you're practicing yoga and there's still pain in the body, or there are things that you are working through, and the practice of yoga feels like it's not necessarily addressing those things. And as a caveat, I just want to share, like, the tradition of yoga as a spiritual technology was designed to free us, right? To liberate us from the suffering of our mind. All of the other benefits that are associated with yoga, as I was saying, they're the sideshow. But there's actually a destination on this path. There's an ultimate goal in a place to arrive to that I believe is really like the point, and realizing this in my own journey, in my own path, took many years, and as I was saying, many thousands of days of practice, right? Thousands and thousands of hours. And I'm still coming to remember that even today, and it's a work in progress, you could say. And for whatever reason, yoga is often associated with, like, we could call it the woo-woo, like people associate or relate yoga to these alternative modalities. And I think that there's a reason for that, and first of all, like, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm a big skeptic. I'm a huge, I ask a lot of questions. I don't believe things at face value. And that sort of contraction, and that narrow mind that I had is really the lens that I came to yoga through, and also felt like this is kind of woo-woo, like what's the deal with these chakras and all this talk of energy and things like that. And more and more and more, that the ancient science of yoga has revealed to me that, wow, like, these people who were presenting these teachings to us and passed them down over generations and generations were like legit spiritual scientists. You know what I mean? Like, they documented their revelations, and they created a map that I think we can learn from and can use and apply in the modern lives that we are living today. And for me, I am very glad that I was able to let go of, like, my own projections and my own assumptions about what the path of yoga is or was, because that, right, as I was saying earlier, that kind of narrow-mindedness is what I carried with me into when I was first started practicing. And the deeper I went, the wider my perception became. And the more I realized that, like, oh wow, this is about a lot more than I initially thought. I was just trying to heal myself. I was trying to heal my body and come into a feeling of, like, contentment and happiness with myself. And wow, I definitely bit off more than I could chew at first. So as I reflect and share out loud, it's an opportunity for me to kind of go back and mine some of the wisdom that was there for me in those experiences. I guess I can start in 2015, which is when I got on a plane to come down to Costa Rica for the first time. And I live here now full-time here in Costa Rica in this beautiful house in the mountains. It's incredible. I love it so much. But at the time, in my first visit down here, I was living in Arizona in the desert. So I came down here in 2015, and I invested $5,000 that I had saved up from when I was a mortgage banker. And I just quit my job as a mortgage banker. Well, I had no plan really, and I was just deciding to go all into my spiritual journey, which is why I decided I was going to come to Costa Rica and take all that money that I had saved up and put it towards a yoga teacher training program. My intention of going to a yoga teacher training program was just to deepen my own practice, to understand really what I was trying to do with my sadhana, with my practice, to get a better understanding of the path overall, and to be able to apply the tools in my own personal spiritual laboratory, which was basically in my bedroom, right? because at the time I was going to the studio and I was following the instructions of the teacher, which was great, and it gave me a good base of development. But in order to go deeper, I wanted to learn how to apply that stuff for myself. And when I was going to the training at that time, I was still very damaged. You know, my body, my mind, my spirit, my energy, all of the things that I mentioned as imbalances were still very present for me, even though I had been practicing yoga every day for about a year at that point. And I was just determined to like get to the root of what was going on, you know, and to create health, you know, and radiance and happiness. Well, I went to that yoga training and I became vegetarian for the first time. I stopped lifting weights for the first time in 8 years, right? I had been exercising with weights pretty much 5 times a week, sometimes less, oftentimes more, since I was 17. So this was 2015, I was 25. And I'm not saying that those things were what shifted it all for me, but definitely everything started to change, you know, like my personality started to really loosen up, I guess is the best way to say it. My ego, my projection and my narrow-minded perception of what was possible for myself and for others and just in general in life. And it was there in Costa Rica at this yoga teacher training where I was introduced to an authentic lineage, right? And like through that introduction, there was, I guess you could call it like a transmission or a spark of energy that awakened something in me, and it hasn't gone back to sleep, you know, that fire hasn't gone out. It's only, I've just fanned the flame and fed the flame ever since then. Because that was like the switch of orienting to yoga as more of a mystical path, but also a practical spiritual science. You know, it was like seeing, wow, this is way more than just physical fitness. There are many dimensions and layers to this spiritual journey through yoga that I'm on, maybe you're on. And you know, it's not like I became enlightened or anything, but definitely something was awakened in me. And it took me some time to understand that and also see where the path was leading me. And I think that's where I'll get to the second part of the story, which was coming back home and integrating those teachings into my life. I still didn't have a job. I was living off of savings. I was practicing all the time. I was still going to the studio, but I started to practice on my own in my bedroom, like I was calling the personal spiritual laboratory. And I got invited to start teaching, actually. I wasn't intending to become a yoga teacher, but someone invited me and asked if I wanted to teach. It was at a boxing gym. I was sandwiched between the wrestling class and the boxing class with like boom boxes, you know, those old school boom boxes. It was a nightmare, you know. It was crazy that I showed up 3 times a week to do that. But hey, man, it was $25 a class, and I was accepting anything that I could get. And I was really passionate, and I loved what the path was doing for me. So I wanted to, of course, share that with others. And over time, you know, I'm just kind of doing my thing, trying to make ends meet. And I got invited to go back to Costa Rica now in 2016 to assist in a yoga teacher training program where I was going to be teaching anatomy and physiology for yoga teachers. And I had a really extensive background in those things from my days as a weightlifter, and I was also doing quite a bit of coaching and helping to train other people in their physical fitness routines. And so that anatomy and physiology background lent itself well to understanding kind of the science of yoga and the muscles and the bones and all of that, you know, the biomechanics and that stuff. But that was still just very much the surface, you know. And I made a little money from doing that. And after that teaching program, I took that money and I went traveling. I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't have a plan. Well, I ended up in India, of course, and specifically Rishikesh. And it was in Rishikesh where I ended up meeting one of my primary teachers and mentors, Steve Harrison of the Yoga Sanctuary. He lives in England. And he has since built an ashram in the countryside of England, which is just incredible. Wildwood Ashram, you can check it out. At the time that I met him, he didn't have that yet. He just had a little yoga school in his home back in Southampton. Well, meeting him, and he's like a bona fide Hatha Yoga master, you know, he was just like an extraordinary human being, a father, just a workhorse of a man. And it was through meeting him and like receiving his transmission specifically of Hatha Yoga and the traditional methods of purification, like the pranayamas and the kriyas and the bandhas and the mudras, and receiving that from him, and I started to integrate that into my practice, that things just started to transform quite radically. You know, before that I was really heavily into the asana vinyasa sequences of Ashtanga yoga, so I was just like focused on that aspect, the physical aspect of my practice. And it wasn't until the energetics started to reveal themselves to me that I realized I got to keep doing this. You know, there's something here working for me. Now, a word to the wise. I just want to make it clear that this process I'm talking about is not all sunshine and rainbows, right? Like dealing with or working directly with the life force and the prana, we're starting to deal with Kundalini. And Kundalini is oftentimes misinterpreted or misunderstood, but I like to think of it as it's just the cosmic force that's in everything that inspires evolution, it inspires growth, it inspires becoming and transformation, of course. And so inside of us, this is just a little bit of a context for Kundalini, I believe that there is a quality that is inspired to become. And that quality that I possess, that you possess, that everything that lives has a spark of this, it's the driver of evolution. And that is the essence of Kundalini, right? The driver of evolution, the driver of change, the driver of growth. And I won't get into the mythological stories and the conceptual framework of Kundalini in this video, but what I was sharing in my personal experience, that I started to work with the pranayamas and the kriyas and these Hatha Yoga techniques that allowed me to interact with the life force on a subtler level, right? Because asana to some degree is working with this, but asana is a prerequisite to the more advanced stages of yoga. And so once I started to apply those more advanced teachings, they're just steps on the path and a progression actually. That's when a lot of things started to come up for me. It was like burning through all of the inauthenticity and all of the self-delusion and the self-doubt and basically the limitations that I had been projecting on myself that were preventing me from healing, preventing me from growing, basically keeping me stuck. Those things were like embedded somewhere in my nervous system and my subtle body as like dense energies, and working with the traditional techniques that I was exposed to started to rub against that stuff like friction, you know, and it was like just an incredible purification process that was very uncomfortable, I would say. And it was accelerated due to my intensity and just the sheer volume of sadhana that I was doing. You know, after India, I went to England, and it was there that I was studying with Steve, and I was practicing 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours a day of these progressive sequences of asana, vinyasa, pranayama, kriya, bandha, mudra, meditation. These were the traditional teachings from Hatha Yoga as it was designed as a way to not only awaken Kundalini, but to manage the awakened life force of when the Kundalini is fully activated and circulating, right? When we are completely surrendered to the evolutionary path of our, I guess you could call our soul, or our unique purpose as a being in this life, right? That was like that was like the impulse of light that's poured into us when we were born and is motivating us to live. Well, that impulse is like, you know, if we're not aligned with it, then it's like angry in some way, you know? And I think that idea is, you know, that's just like my belief around it, but that idea of it being angry or like pissed off is like, you can see that in some of the mythological stories and some of the spiritual traditions and some of the teachings around the divine beings, that if I don't learn to cooperate with this divine energy that has given me life, and I don't learn how to align myself with it, then suffering starts to take place, because it's like I'm betraying my life force. You know, I am betraying the intelligence that's in me by turning a blind eye to it or not learning how to relate to it in a beneficial way. Because that's the force that, like, that's been in us forever, you know? Like, your body, my body, has been developed over millions of years of evolution. Well, I didn't mean to wax all metaphysical and preach or anything, but like this was like what I was starting to understand, you know, and starting to encounter this great force and experience the friction and the purification of burning through the parts of me that were resisting living my fullest expression, basically. Well, that process, you know, of practicing all that time and being in England with Steve, it culminated to a kaboom moment, I guess you could say. It was like, yeah, it was like a kaboom moment. That's a story for another time. I won't share more about it, but that moment really secured the realization that, okay, it's time to go back to Arizona and to continue doing this work at my home in Chandler. So I went back. It's 2017 now. I got invited to start teaching again, so I started teaching at a studio. And very quickly I realized I think I should teach in my home. And the reason for that is because I wanted to teach some of the deeper aspects of yoga without diving into the whole physical fitness side of it. And having a space in my home where I could just be totally authentic and not have to fill some kind of political agenda. You know, the yoga studio model is amazing at getting people in the door to practice, but it's really become largely a fitness industry. And I wanted to teach more authentic practices, including the pranayamas and the kriyas and some of the seated activity that from the outside looking in, it's like, it's not very sexy, you know? Well, I cleared the space in my living room and I started a really grassroots, humble, simple shala, right? A practice space, and invited people to come practice, people who were reaching out and asking about my journey with yoga. I said, come on over. It was donation based. It was super, just simple. Well, that carried on for several years, and every year I would go back to Costa Rica to do a personal retreat. I would take like a month off and I would just go and I would practice in the jungle somewhere. And that was my way of refilling my tank. And on one of those retreats that I took for myself, I think it was 2018, I remember I was meditating on the beach and I just get this clear message, clear as day. It was like, 2023, you will be living in Costa Rica and you will have land. I remember writing in my journal, 2023, I'll have land in Costa Rica. I wish I could find that journal so I could show you guys. Well, that was 5 years away, and I realized I had a lot of work to do, and I was still a broke yoga teacher, and I was barely making ends meet, and I was like, okay, 5 years, like, what do I need to do? And all I could think was just keep on the path. You know, just keep focusing on your sadhana, keep focusing on your spiritual connection, keep focusing on your relationship to God. You know, I'm talking to myself. And everything will unfold. Well, it has unfolded. And so here I am in a house that I am now the proud owner, as I was sharing earlier, up in the mountains in Costa Rica. And I think if you want to hear more of the story about how I ended up in this home, you can click on this video here and you can watch how I arrived to this moment. See you there.